Hey guys, welcome back to another video. I got a comment on a video that figured would be relevant, talking about the early days of this whole thing, and the person had some specific questions about my situation. So, comes from Jerry, and Jerry says, so what was your overall timeline? Meaning, how long were you in your state of your anticipated divorce? How long during the divorce? And how long in overall anxiety trauma? And how long until you got stability with your relationship with your children? My situation kind of flamed out in a rather rapid timeline. I mean, just for some context, I was married for 23 years, 22 years, if I remember correctly. I'm trying to remember when this whole thing blew apart. But, so basically 2 decades in, and things were always a little tense. But it wasn't until the summer of the year that this happened. So it was basically that summer, beginning of the summer, like June, April, May, June, July, where the relationship really started tanking. And I started thinking that maybe this was not going to work out. The short version of this, I'll just add this really quick, short version and probably a long video, is I had really come to peace in my life. Things were going well. I was really grateful for everything that was going on. I was like, man, I got a great career. I have a great wife. I have a great family. All the trouble, we have a disabled son. I mean, all the troubles with that, we survived. We made it through it. This is just just a wonderful, wonderful thing. During that, my anxiety had really started to decrease. And unfortunately, what happened, or what that meant, is that the ability for me to get really anxiety-ridden was diminished. And the reality of that is the ex, or the wife at the time, was starting to lose control of being able to trigger my emotions and evoke a response. Now, I didn't understand what the hell I was dealing with. She did some things to just try to drive a major wedge. I think in retrospect, looking back on it, she was trying to reset the dynamic, trying to basically get me to be back to the person that I used to be, so to speak. And at that stage of my life, I was so emotionally, mentally exhausted of it that something had to change. And I started pushing, I guess in some ways you could say, boundaries. I didn't really understand boundaries at that time. So what ended up happening is what normally would have worked in the past didn't, and things just started spiraling out of control. This all, like I said, started like probably May of that year. Like by maybe June, we started doing marriage counseling. That was a colossal train wreck and didn't accomplish anything. Little caveat, side note, everyone always says never do therapy with a toxic narcissistic person. And there's truth to that, but there's a problem. Yeah. And what that problem is if you are really in love with somebody, it's not easy to just walk away from the relationship and be like, yeah, okay, I'm done. 2 decades, it's over, Not an easy thing to do. So I needed to actually put some effort into it to at least try to save the marriage. So that's where I have a little different in the whole marriage counseling thing. The thing is, you have to have realistic boundaries. You can't go in there and just have them beat you up. Fortunately, I was lucky. I think it was very apparent to everybody besides me that what was going on and what the deal was. But what I'm trying to say is, if you go through and the person or the therapist is trying to blame everything on you, or is not really validating your concerns or whatever, you still have to have a boundary with that, right? You don't necessarily want to go into a situation and be like, well, I'm just going to go in and get beat up and devalued. It's a tough position because most of the time when we're in those situations, we're not really in our best spot. So it makes it pretty tough. Okay, anyways. So June to about August, like end of July is I think whenever I decided that, because I'm actually the one that left, and so I had, let me just clarify this. So I had a therapist, the ex had a therapist, and we had a marriage counselor. Now, the therapist I had was work related, so it was part of the EAP. Most big companies are going to have some resources that are available to you at free of charge, and that's what I use. During the course of this, it's like we go to a meeting or to an appointment, the ex and I would not talk until the next appointment, and it was just stupid. And finally, I think my therapist was like, hey, you just need to ask her if she's willing to work on this, and if there's any answer other than yes, it's over. So I took a break. I went to go visit my mom, and ended up texting the ex saying, hey, are we going to work on this? And it was all like, well, I haven't decided yet, or some stupid nonsensical answer. And I'm like, okay, then it's done. We're done. When I get back, I'll file for divorce and we can be done with this. And it was just, so that was around the July-August time frame. So let me just double check what we're talking about. So a few months knowing about the divorce. So probably anticipating divorce. It was like way at the beginning like before we started marriage counseling, there was probably a few months before that where that piece that I had that had just been destroyed. It's like, I couldn't understand it. I'm sitting here going, man, just a few months ago, I was feeling really good, and now I'm like completely losing it. It was not a good time. So that was probably from the time we started marriage counseling. I would say probably 3 or 4 months before that. I hadn't thought about that, so it was a really good question. So Jerry, I'm glad you asked that. So that was anticipating that, and I didn't want a divorce. I just knew I couldn't continue to live like this. So about probably 3 months, about 6 months anticipating the divorce. How long in overall anxiety and trauma? That's a tough one because honestly, I mentioned that there was a period of time, like for a couple of years, where I was feeling pretty good. So that wasn't, that the anxiety and trauma had dissipated. Before that, it was constant for probably a good decade or more. I mean, even before we had kids, we waited like 6 to 8 years before we had kids. And I know that's a weird timing, but I just can't remember that. I'm getting old. So we were married a while and didn't have kids until after I got out of the Air Force, which was in 97. Son was born in 99. A lot of trauma and anxiety throughout my life. I don't know if that really answers your question. Now, if you're asking once a divorce started and it was like iron hot fire of anxiety, so that was probably technically from that end of May time frame until the divorce was final, which is your next question, which actually happened rather quickly, to be perfectly honest, which was in June of the following year. So basically, filed for divorce in August time frame, and it was finalized the next year. So what was that, 9 months, 9, 10, let's see, June, yeah, so, it wasn't as fast as what most people, or it was pretty fast compared to what most people were going through, and it was completely contentious. This was a contested divorce. It was a nightmare, custody evaluators, all kinds of stupid allegations. I remember I spent weeks, probably months, just trying to find out, like, what do you want? What stuff do you want? Well, I want my half. This is the answer I would get. I'm like, what do you want? I want my half. Okay, what half do you want? I want my half. Okay, of our stuff, what do you want? I want my half. I'm like, what the hell does that even mean? I think at one point, that finally stopped it, is I just said, okay, fine, we'll sell everything, we'll do an estate sale, we'll take the money, we'll cut it in half, and there you go. You get your half, I get my half, we all get what we're entitled to. And she was like, I don't want to do that, I just want my half. I think to her that meant she wanted everything, plus all the money, plus all the rights to move wherever she wanted. It was just stupid. So note to anyone going through this, do not expect to have a rational conversation with your ex. It isn't going to happen. They are going to play word salad with you and drive you out of your mind. Just be mentally prepared for that. That's easy to say now, but I'll tell you, that little experience was not fun and was incredibly complicated. So how long until you got stability with your relationships with your children? Okay, so my problem through probably the first 2 years of this is I didn't know what I was dealing with. I knew the ex was trying to get the kids to pick mommy, 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 and she was trying to get them to like just say that they wanted to live with her. They only wanted to visit me, and that type of crap. In other words, flip the dynamic of the custody. And I, unfortunately, what I was doing is every time she would do something, I would try to talk with the kids and undo that, which ultimately hurt me because it actually stressed the kids out more. I would have been much better off, and it would have made everything better for everyone else if I would have just ignored the crap she was doing, focused on making the relationship with my kids as stable as possible and mitigating the effects of their mom throughout all of this. Unfortunately, in the beginning, I didn't do that. Especially during the divorce, I didn't do that because I was scared to death, because she told me, she's like, well, I'm taking my kids out of state, and basically F you, and I was scared to death that was going to happen, that she was going to take the kids, move out of state, take all the money, and I would basically just be, never in my kids' lives. I'd be from afar watching their downfall and completely broke funding her new life. So it was a pretty scary time. The sad part about that for me is I couldn't see the positives that were happening, and as a result of that, I just was in this catastrophic cyclone of chaos that was kind of my own creating. The problem is that when you're in that fear mode, you don't know what's going to happen. You think everything's going to go to crap. You're trying to prepare yourself. You're trying to convince everyone what's really going on. And it's not a good situation to be in. I remember at one point, she had told me, I'm leaving the state, I'm taking the kids. And I was still having conversations with my brother-in-laws and stuff like that, or one of them in particular. And he's like, oh, no, she says that you both are important in the kids' lives, and she hasn't said anything about moving. And it wasn't until I forced the issue, actually I forced my attorney to ask for a settlement because I had made a comment like that to the ex, and she's like, oh, well, we could settle. And then it was like, well, you haven't sent a settlement, so I forced my attorney to send a settlement. He was not happy with that, by the way. But what's good about it is they sent a thing back rejecting my 50-50 custody offer, said basically, well, Miss Butterfly is moving to out of state. I won't say the state, but moving out of state, and there will be no way to do 50-50 with the kids, with them being 2 days away. So, but the good part is when I had that letter, I was able to send it to my ex-brother-in-law and say, hey, you're telling me that she says she's not trying to leave, but right here, she won't agree to us being both equally in the kids' lives because she's moving out of state. And that, that prompted like, oh my God, I didn't know that. And then what ended up happening, and this is another little note that you guys need to be prepared for. Initially, the guy was like, oh, that's just wrong. Let me know whatever I can do to help. And ultimately, that guy sent a letter. It wasn't an affidavit because it was just a letter, but a letter to the custody evaluator, really weirdly worded exactly the way my ex speaks and talks, saying that I was a piece of shit, that all I cared about was toys, electronics, and money, and never cared about the kids or anybody else. So there you go. My point about that is, do not expect the other side or the other family members to be loyal to what is right. Expect them to be loyal to that person. Now, I've known people who have had their in-laws say, yeah, our daughter or whatever is batshit crazy, and this would not be good for the kids. That's rare. Don't expect that. So just be careful of that. That kind of set the dividing line for that. And those last few months sucked. We had a custody evaluation we were supposed to have in December of that year. So I think our first court date would have been October, but they filed wrong. So then it was November. So our first court date was in November. Temporary orders were set, which I will tell you, whenever they threw out the numbers, the people in the courtroom gasped at the number that I was forced to pay. Amazingly enough, she gave me the kids for the first Christmas and proceeded to bounce and leave the state. Go back, quote unquote, home. You know, this is one of those things where also you got to keep in mind that, you know, like this person, Jerry's asking, you know, you're still, if you're early into this, you're still anticipating that the person you're dealing with is a normal human, not a complete self-centered psychopath. Well, not really a psychopath, but I'm just being hyperbolic. But that, you know, they'll put the kids first. And I couldn't understand initially. It's like, why in the world would you on the very first Christmas leave the frickin' state and leave your kids? You know, I mean, she agreed to that. I mean, it wasn't like, you know, I mean, it was like, oh yeah, you can have the kids first. So maybe, I mean, I used to think, well, maybe she was going back to try to see if she could find a place or something. I think it was all about her, and she's like, oh, cool, he can watch the kids and I can go spend, you know, Christmas with my family. Note to self, if you are starting to see behaviors like this and you're like, wow, this person, I mean, you can't figure it out, just think of somebody who's completely self-absorbed, self-centered, who's probably like at a 10-year-old level and has no concept of empathy or even the consideration for anybody else, including their kids. Once you can do that, you can start to guess what they're going to do. Okay, so that part sucked, right? So that part, through that, you know, she bailed on the custody evaluation, and when she came back, she bailed on it again because it wasn't in her timeline, which I thought, oh, great, you know, it's going to mess up or piss off the custody evaluators and our evaluator, not plural. And no, they gave her a pass. I mean, they commented on some things, but, you know, I mean, for the most part, do the best you can throughout this, but don't expect that anyone is just, especially with the mom, that anyone is going to just automatically side against them and, hold on, let me move this out of the way, side against them and, you know, hold them accountable, because it didn't happen. I had a couple friends of mine who said, you know, don't expect that. I was kind of hoping that, you know, they would come back and say, well, this person is unstable and, you know, dad should get custody, but that was not, it was 50-50. Keep in mind that when I was going through this, the whole accusation is that I hated, what was it? It was like I hated women, you know, and, you know, oh my God, how is this going to affect our two daughters? I was verbally and physically abusive, controlling, you know, whatever. I mean, just porn addicted, you name it. It was accusation after accusation. It was good times. No, it wasn't good times. It was horrible times and incredibly stressful. I'd like to say that's when I got all my gray, but that was not the case. Okay, so, and then how long until you got stability with your relationship with your children? Okay. Fundamentally, my relationship was okay with the kids. Obviously, they were really stressed. And what the ex would do, and I'm sure a lot of you guys can relate to this. When I say guys, women can be affected by this as well. So all you peoples, kids would walk in the door. Hey guys, glad to see you. About maybe an hour into it, bing, you know, email or text with some just, you know, bomb dropped in my lap. And I like to think that I'm not a complete and total fucking moron. But yeah, well, you know, it is what it is. What I'm saying is that it took me a while to recognize that pattern, and it would completely destroy the time I had with the kids. So the kids would walk in, I'd be okay. She'd be able to drop a bomb in the whole situation. The kids would recognize the stress, they would internalize it, and that would affect things. So it took me probably took me a good 6 months to kind of get some stability on that. The problem is I did not heal those fundamental wounds. I put them in a box, I hid them away, and what ended up happening is you know, like 6-7 months later after all this, I started dating my current girlfriend, Debbie. Things were going really well. The ex was leaving me alone. Yeah, it was painful. The money sucked. I mean, everything kind of sucked, but there was stability there was stability in my life. And then I introduced the kids to Debbie, and the ex lost her effing mind, called up the Department of Child Support Services and said, he's a deadbeat. You know, during the government shutdown, she didn't say it this way, but during the government shutdown, I didn't get paid. Partly that was my fault, but you know, whatever. So she was like, yeah, he's a deadbeat, turned me in, basically had the county start managing the case. The last thing you want is the county managing your case, because they are ruthless and vicious. So, and even with talking to him, they said a lot of times the disgruntled exes will always call them and just try to find ways to screw with the ex. So I had the Department of Child Support Services coming after me like every week, sending me notes like, you know, here's your court order, prove that you have medical insurance, otherwise we're going to get it and charge you for it. You know, God, at one point they said I was $5,000 in arrears, and I called them and they're like, oh no, you're fine. And then the week after that, they started garnishing my wages for like $1,000 in arrears. It was not a good time. And that kind of set me where I crashed back down. So I guess I had this thing where I was low. Maybe I'm doing this wrong. I'll go this way. I was low. And then about 17 years into it, things started getting better and I started feeling good. Ex lost control, crashed everything down, crashed it down into the divorce. And then, we got the divorce and it kind of went back up and then crashed back down. And then slowly I started figuring things out. Really, the big catalyst that helped me figure things out was whenever the potential for an undiagnosed NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, from the cluster B of the DSM-5, that was whenever I started doing some research on that. Initially, I know I've told this story before, but initially when that was told to me, I was kind of irritated because all these people, it's like, oh, it's this, oh, it's that. But when I went home, did the Google, looked it up, and I was like, holy shit, this is exactly the pattern and behavior that I'm dealing with. She's doing, it's like, they do this. It was like check. I was like, holy shit. Then I said, well, how do you co-parent with a narcissist? You don't. You can't. And that's what you'll ultimately realize, that you cannot parent or co-parent with a narcissistic, toxic person because they have no ability to do it. The only way they'll do it is if you do exactly what they want, agree with everything they want, give them complete control, and never question anything they're doing. Then you can quote-unquote co-parent with them. But if you have any ideas, it's not going to work. If your kids start having problems, I guarantee you, if you have a conversation and you say, hey, I'm thinking we need to do this, this, and this for little Johnny or little Timmy, they will do the exact opposite and use it against you to make you look like you're a scumbag. So that is probably the long version of that. The only thing else I would say, how long until you got stability with that? So that was probably like so with the ups and downs, I think once I finally realized that, and I changed my approach with the kids, like the transition day. If you've seen my other videos where I talk about Groundhog Day, which is transition day, where everything resets. Initially I was like, hey, you're back here. We got to jump back into things. I realized that was a colossal mistake. So I would wait a day and let the kids reacclimate to being over. As long as they weren't completely disrespectful, every once in a while they'd push it to where you had to do something. But if it was just normal, whatever, just let them transition. And then by the second or third day, it was fine. Once I started realizing that, it started to calm things down. Once I started understanding that she was playing these games and not taking the bait. That's the biggest part, is because your ex will set the children up as little like time bombs. They walk in your house, explode, and really it's to see how are you going to react, right? I had one point where my middle daughter, announced to the world, I went and dropped her off at her mom's for something, and she skipped back in the car and says, "Mommy respects my decision." And I'm like, "What decision is that, honey?" "To be homeschooled and mommy can be my teacher." And actually, I think I had an initial flare on that where I'm like, well, that ain't effing happening. And then that turned into, when we finally got home, a screaming match with my daughter, screaming at me, pointing her little bony finger, and I just had to remain incredibly calm. That's what I'm talking about. You got to recognize what's going on so you don't take the bait, right? Because that's what it is. They're trying to create chaos and conflict in your house. And early on, how you interact with it is really going to determine your success or not. So, Jerry, I hope that answered the question. Let me just go back through it. Overall timeline, talked about that. Meaning, how long were you in the state of anticipating divorce? Mentioned that, it's like 6 months. How long during or overall anxiety trauma? I mean, realistically, it was pretty much most of my life. But after the divorce, it was probably 2 or 3 years. And what I mean by this is like the anxiety of going to the mailbox and having a flashback or PTSD, seeing their car in town or a car that looked like hers, freaking me, and having an anxiety attack. Seeing somebody out in public that I might look like her, that type of thing. I mean, it's really weird. It's real, right? I mean, so if you're experiencing that, it's a thing, So don't let anyone tell you that you're being stupid or that you have a problem. I mean, you have a problem, but that is a very stereotypical response to these scenarios and to the trauma bond and all that kind of stuff. So I was in that for probably a couple of years. But yeah, I mean, for clarity, I think I am at, let's see, let me do the countdown timer. Countdown. The separation was August 10th, so that's been 11 years, 3 months. And the divorce was finalized 10 years, 5 months. And just for clarity, I've been with Debbie for 8 years. In January, it'll be 9 years. So, it's been a long time. I think the real question that you're asking is, how long does it take to get your life back? That depends on you. It depends on how much work you put into it. What I would tell you is, if you find yourself getting triggered, or if someone tells you a story and it makes you really angry, or your ex does something and you have that visceral, like instantaneous 0 to 100 response, means you haven't healed from it. These aren't fun, but after a while I started looking at them as indicators on that I'm not healed yet, right? And then now I'm to the point. Very rarely does the ex do something where I have a visceral response that lasts more than maybe 4 seconds. So it gets better. Part of the thing that helped me on that was the absolute thinking. I have a video on that. I really started working on that. That took me a few months for that to really start to take hold. And then the whole comparing what was going on at her house compared to what was my house. That's where I came up with the black hole thinking. And that helped me to just okay, stop thinking about what's going on over there. It's irrelevant. It doesn't matter. Unless it's criminal and the kids are going to die, don't worry about it. And hard to do, but that helps. So if anyone else has any more detailed questions they want, let me know. Put them down in the comments below. Jerry, if you happen to be watching this, let me know if this answered all your questions. Bottom line, guys, hang in there. This shit sucks. It feels like it's gonna just tear you apart, which it is. But the hard part is, it feels like there's no hope of it ever ending. There is hope. You just have to work through it. And you have to work through it. If you don't work through it, the universe will give you an opportunity to figure this lesson out with another experience, typically worse. And I don't want any of you guys to go through that. I want you to take this nightmare, heal from it, recapture your life. And I want to get those emails 2 years down the road, a year down the road, saying, hey, you were right, got my life back, and things are great. So on that, sorry for the long one. This is a way long one. We'll see how this video does. And I'll chat with you on the next one. Take care. Bye.